believe that the federal government has no place in the privacy of our lives, and it is a violation of our freedom of speech. To be able to blacklist and shut down internet websites that the federal government does not agree with is not American and belongs somewhere in North Korea or China, Communist China. So I'm adamantly opposed to such pieces of legislation.
Ms. Zimmann, what is your response to the question?
Where
do you stand for internet and censorship and invasion of privacy possible under SOPA and CISPA?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to take just a moment to thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you for all of you for taking the time to join us and be a part of the political process. If everyone was as involved as you all are, what a wonderful environment we would have. So thank you for being here, and thank you for Mr. Eberly for joining us. I also am very much opposed to SOPA and CISPA. I understand that when our freedom is infringed upon by people looking at what we do on the internet, this is big government. My opponent, Bob Latta, suggests that he is a fan of small government. He calls himself and claims to be a small government conservative. However, he supported the legislation for CISPA, which would enable a government to be so large that it could actually monitor the internet. In my mind, we don't need a government that large. I don't know what he's talking about when he says he wants CISPA and he wants the internet regulated and watched, but I adamantly oppose SOPA and CISPA.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmann.
Mr. Eberly, where do you stand on Citizens United ruling? Would they support an amendment to the Constitution that say corporations are not people and money is not speech?
I believe this ruling was more about the freedom of speech in a political campaign, and that we are all entitled to our opinions when it comes to such matters as important as a political election as for president. An amendment, I think, is out of the question, really, when it comes to this ruling, as I agree with the Supreme Court's decision. And I think that we can all agree that when it comes to freedom of speech and the constitutional protected rights that we have, we should all agree with the Supreme Court in this ruling and support their decision.
Thank you. Ms. Zimmann, what is your response to that question?
Corporations are not people, and money is not speech. I adamantly oppose the ruling. I believe that when a corporation can register as a student at Owens Community College, then it will be a person, and no sooner than that. I stand in adamant opposition to this ruling.
And if we look at how corporations do have political opinions, we've been allowing newspapers to tell you how to vote for years, and we allow MSNBC to lean forward as much as ExxonMobil has their decision on who they think they should vote for. So I do believe corporations are made up of people.
Just to clarify the terms of the debate, are we allowed to respond after the second person speaks? I just want to clarify.
So it's a fair question. I originally figured each candidate would have their time to respond in the first initial asking.
So there will be no responding to...
No rebuttal.
I was taking Bob Letta's time.
I'm glad for that.
Mr. Eberly, I would like to know where you stand on the clauses of the NDAA that allow indefinite detention of U.S. citizens without due process.
Wow. This is a big one. I am adamantly opposed to the clause that calls for indefinite detention of Americans. In fact, I think it should be illegal to make a law that includes such language as indefinite detention. It's the kind of legislation that you would expect out of Nazi Germany and not U.S. Congress. So I'm adamantly opposed. Bob Latta, in fact, voted for this NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. And in his defense, don't worry about it, they're not going to arrest Americans. Well, you know, a district court judge in New York stated that it was unconstitutional, this clause. And the Obama administration's response, I believe, is, okay, we'll just use drones to kill those we oppose, and therefore you won't need a trial, and there will be no person to indefinitely detain. This is something that's more out of a science fiction novel, and not something that should be proposed in the United States Congress. It is beyond me that we can allow our representatives to pass this legislation and allow our president, Obama, who says he's a constitutional scholar, to sign this and allow it to be law in the land. This is just completely absurd. Thank you.
We stand on the clauses of the NDAA that allow indefinite detention of U.S. citizens without due process.
The NDAA basically states that a person can be held without just cause. They can be put in prison without access to an attorney, without the opportunity for a hearing. The last time habeas corpus was suspended was 150 years ago, when we were in the midst of a civil war. Our republic is in no such danger at this time, and there is no need for the NDAA. To bring it home and give you an example of what someone could experience with the NDAA. I'm a professor at Bowling Green State University, and my students sometimes go on spring break. Sometimes they get in some trouble when they're on spring break. Now, as a student, I never got in trouble on spring break, I promise. If I did, the media would find it out, so I can say I didn't. However, could you imagine a student on spring break getting thrown in jail because of something they did without the opportunity to engage with a lawyer, nor the opportunity for a fair hearing? This is what the NDAA enacts. So I am adamantly opposed to the NDAA, which my opponent Bob Latta has supported. It's just wrong. Thank
you. Mr. Eberly, can you list in a minute or less what you think the government does well?
Well, that's a stumping question for a libertarian. The first thing that comes to mind are all the things that the government doesn't do well, but honestly, in a positive note, I think we have the strongest military superpower in the world, and it's something to be very proud of, that our men and women in uniform are defending the principles of this country for everyone. And we believe in freedom and liberty and justice for all. And that the military is the greatest thing that our government has. And I do understand that we have to cut spending, and we do have to cut spending in our defense budget as well. But I think that we can all appreciate the strength of our military in defending freedom across this world. And I find that to be, in a minute or less, the best our government can do. I don't want to mention the TSA, they're pretty good at violating our rights every time we want to fly a plane, but thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Zimmann, can you list in a minute or less what you think the government does well?
Without our government, we wouldn't have public education. We wouldn't be here in this building. We wouldn't have the federal highway system. We wouldn't have the National Park Service. We wouldn't have the Postal Service and letter carriers, who are the best in the world. Government working with private industry can absolutely ensure the progress of society. The major success stories of industry all over the world are because our government carefully shaped, nuanced policies that benefited all of its citizens. Thank you.
Mr. Eberly, in a free society, what is the proper role of government?
We are in a free society, and the proper role of government is to protect our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, to protect our private property rights, and to enforce contract law. The Constitution specifically enumerates the role of Congress, and I find that many of our representatives in Congress have taken liberty with the Commerce Clause and general welfare to create programs of redistribution and regulation that are really hindering the growth and economic success of this country. So if we were to go to our constitutionally enumerated powers as our government, we would find ourselves in a much better place than we are today.
Ms. Zimmann, in a free society, what is the proper role of government?
Well, I can start by telling you what the proper role of government is not. It is not to redefine rape. It is not to control women's relationships with their doctors. And it's certainly not to monitor our internet use. What the role of government is to listen to the people, the governed. That is why it is such an atrocity that my opponent, Bob Latta, has failed to show up here tonight, where he could listen and engage with his constituents. The role of government is to always and forever be responsive to the people it seeks to serve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Eberly, how specifically do you plan to promote job growth in the district? What empirical success is the basis for your plans?
Well, I have a bold new plan to take to Congress when I'm elected. 0, 0, 0. The Libertarians are going to abolish income taxes. This is going to be huge. Abolishing the income tax, the personal income tax, the corporate income tax, and capital gains tax will create tens of millions of jobs. The job growth that we will see as well from reducing the burdens that government has placed upon our businesses, private enterprises, and small businesses and entrepreneurs will allow us to create jobs, because it's not the government that creates jobs, it's you, all of you, each and every one of us who creates a small business. We did build that, and we do hire people if the government would allow us. You keep the money in your pocket and you can spend it as a lot better than the government ever could. So I believe that job growth really comes down to the principles of a free people left to their own devices, as opposed to government bureaucracy shelling out our taxpayer money to failed businesses and ventures that deem fit. We could name Solyndra, to name one. You give the free market the ability to take private capital and invest in business and take the risk as well as the reward. You create business and economic growth. If you give the government your money and they can just give it to whoever they please, when that business fails, it comes on to the taxpayers. There's a moral hazard here. We really need to support private business by reducing the regulations, and I think the 0-0 tax plan, 0-0-0 tax plan is one way to start.
Ms. Zimmann, how specifically do you plan to promote job growth in the district? What empirical success is the basis for your plans?
Absolutely. First of all, I believe that one of the most important ways to promote job growth in the district is through education. Absolutely educating for the jobs that exist. I'm noticing as I'm traveling throughout the district that we have a number of manufacturers who have said they have good jobs that they cannot fill because they do not have people trained in those specific tasks. So we need to have job training and education, vocational as well as higher ed, to make sure that all of the jobs that are available are filled by qualified people right here in Northwest Ohio. My opponent, Bob Latta, is a huge fan of outsourcing. $73,000 of his campaign contributions have come from companies that have outsourced jobs in Northwest Ohio. He voted against the auto loans. If he had his way, there would be no jobs left in Northwest Ohio. I'm here to defend the auto industry, to emphasize education and job training for the jobs that exist and are unfilled, and to improve our infrastructure. As an engineer, I understand that one of the main incentives for businesses and organizations to come to an area is a strong infrastructure. That is one of the things that I will be emphasizing in my time in Congress. And also, with all due respect to my opponent, one person in Congress is one of 435 members of Congress. And I'm very clear about the fact that in order to accomplish anything, I need to be a cooperative coalition builder. One member out of 435 cannot affect change on their own, and anyone who claims that they can is simply employing tactics to get elected. Thank you.
Mr. Eberly, do you agree with wanting to commit billions to extract energy from underground at great environmental risk? Or would you support developing above-ground energy sources?
This is a question about the free market. When it comes to committing billions to extract resources, we're assuming that the government is going to subsidize the extraction of these resources. If we allow it to be the free market with general oversight by state governments, then I think we'll have an economic boom, as we can see in North Dakota and how well they're doing. I do also believe in developing alternative energy sources, and I think the free market will also help us with this. When there is a need, a market demand, capitalism will prevail. I believe that free market capitalism is the best path to prosperity and not government bureaucracy.
Thank you.
Ms. Zimmann, do you agree with wanting to commit billions to extract energy from underground at great environmental risk? Or would you support developing above-ground energy sources?
Northwest Ohio can and should be ground zero for wind and solar development. With my background in engineering, I've spent some time talking to folks who are involved in these projects, and they have said this is the premier location for wind and solar energy. My opponent, Bob Latta, has voted against this time and time again. He has voted to defund wind and solar alternative energy, costing the United States 75,000 jobs, green-collar jobs, which could bring energy back to this economy at the same time as sustaining the alternative energies that would help us and keep our air and water clean.
Mr. Eberly, everyone wants to lower taxes. What services or programs do you want cut in order to do so?
I don't just want to lower taxes. Let's be clear about this. I want to bring taxes to zero. I think that we can apply a cost-benefit analysis to every part of our federal government and find billions in savings. I think our defense spending as well is a point to look at. We're spending almost $1 trillion in our defense spending right now to support bases across the world. We can bring home a lot of this money and a lot of these jobs and start rebuilding roads, rebuilding bridges and hospitals and schools here in the United States and not in countries halfway around the world. I do think if we bring our defense spending to 2003 levels, we will see much more prosperity in this country and also save the taxpayers in the end.
Thank you.
Ms. Zimmann, everyone wants to lower taxes. What services or programs do you want to cut in order to do so?
How about we start cutting tax loopholes for corporations that move our jobs overseas?
Thank you.
Mr. Eberly, faced with another situation as the Lake High School tragedy, how would you respond if you are elected?
The Lake tragedy will always be in the minds of this community, and I find it that we all feel in their loss of the Lake tragedy. My immediate reaction will be to help in the rescue efforts, to coordinate with local Red Cross, the local leadership, and the nonprofits that will be able to care for those in our community. We need to strengthen these local organizations because we can't depend on a federal response to such tragedy. So we can see local efforts as the main focus of how I would respond.
Thank you.
Ms. Zimmann, faced with another situation as the Lake High School tragedy, how would you respond if you were elected?
I remember well the night that Lake High School was destroyed. I was huddled in a closet with my husband and children and foster children. And I remember thinking there, but for the grace of God, it could have been us. Springfield High School, Rossford High School, Perrysburg. As president of the Northwest Ohio Regional School Board Association during the time when the Lake High School tragedy hit, I was proud to be a part of a group called Lifting Up Lake. We raised tens of thousands of dollars from area businesses and individuals and sponsored a 5K run to help Lake High School and to make sure that they understood that they were a loved and valued part of this community. As a member of Congress, it is my deepest desire to love and value every member of this community and to display it through every decision and vote I take. Thank you.
Mr. Eberly, what type of funding do you plan on bringing back to your district?
Well, I seek to push a policy that doesn't take the money out of our district to begin with. A change in our tax system will keep the money here locally and used by individuals and businesses to build and to help with other organizations. Instead of having to make backroom deals in Congress, you're held hostage when our money is taken from us to the federal level, and then we have to fight to get it back here. It is a ridiculous system that needs to be changed.
Ms. Zimmann, what type of funding do you plan on bringing back to your district?
As I mentioned before, infrastructure is at the top of my list of priorities. We have Hancock and Putnam County in our district, which suffer from massive floods every spring when the rains come. There are businesses that do not want to locate in Findlay, Ohio, because they know that they will be flooded out. If we improve our infrastructure, we have an excellent opportunity to continue to retain and regain businesses. Now, my opponent, Bob Latta, voted for the proposed $398 million bridge to nowhere, while there are bridges right here in this district that need serious help. In Wood County alone, the Wood County engineer stated that 10% of all the bridges are in need of immediate repair or replacement, while my opponent votes for the bridge to nowhere and does not fight for the infrastructure in his district, failing to represent them once again.
Thank you.
Mr. Eberly, having Springfield Township now in the district, how would you address the issue of trains interfering with school buses, and how would you help make it safer?
Well, this is a simple matter of working with who runs the line, whether that is CSX or Norfolk Southern, and trying to work out a schedule where we could have the trains not in places where the school buses would be at that time. It's a simple matter of discussing with the private organizations to help that.
Well, excuse me, I hate to interrupt, but do you know how many trains a day go on that road? Do you know how many trains a day cross that track? There are 40. There are 40 trains a day that go by there. That's all I want to mention. There's 40 trains a day that cross that track.
That shows that there's economic growth. That's great.
Wonderful.
It really is. We do need to work for the safety of the school buses.
Absolutely. I agree with that, but I don't think you're going to change those schedules.
Thank you.
Are we taking questions from the audience?
Ms. Zimmann, having Springfield Township now in the district, how would you address the issue of trains interfering with school buses, and how would you help make it safer?
I'm a proud graduate of Springfield High School. I crossed those train tracks every day for 13 years, and today my son started his freshman year at Springfield High School. Cody Brown, who was killed in the tragic accident 2 years ago, lived one street behind me, and I'm good friends with his parents. Bree Mullinger lost her leg in that same accident. Currently, there is work scheduled to be done in 2014, so we already have that underway. I believe that everyone understands how serious this situation is, and this is already in process. I would continue to support that process. 2014 is too long to wait, but it's better than nothing. At least we have something in the works, and in the meantime, I pray every day for the people who cross those tracks with those immense number of trains barreling down them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Eberly, where do you stand on the federal government cutting funding to colleges and university students?
Well, first of all, I'd like to see more involvement in our colleges with state and local. I think that the federal government has actually artificially increased tuition rates. In 1985, a semester of college would cost about, or quarter would cost about $500. The prices have risen exponentially, and student loans are really a stranglehold. They really are. When you graduate college with $60,000 in student loans at 6% interest, and you can't find a job, and then you flip on the TV and Goldman Sachs got, $7 billion at 0%. You kind of wonder where the real investment is being made. I don't necessarily want to be an advocate for cutting funding and be this bad guy, but there are ways around this issue. The federal government controls the vast majority of student loans, and without competition, these fees are kept high artificially. And having paid for college myself, I know I have applied for scholarships, and I did receive some scholarships, but they only covered a small amount of the actual cost of college. I think more opportunity exists if we examine the issue at a deeper level than just saying cut, cut, cut. But with a positive and successful business sector in our district, and with economic growth, we might find that private organizations will open up educational opportunities for students, as well as vocational studies and technical institutes, to teach students the jobs that we need and to have students work towards jobs that they can fill, as opposed to, the wasteful spending that goes on in a lot of these universities with, it's free money for them, and they build, complex aquatic facilities and really don't concentrate on the education of the students. The costs have risen exponentially, but the aptitude tests have decreased year over year. So really, there really must be more done.
Thank you.
Where do you stand on the federal government cutting funding to the colleges and university students?
Well, I'm a college instructor. I have 2 children in public schools, both of whom will be in college within the next 10 years. So this piece of legislation is very important to me on a personal level. I would say right now that my opponent, Bob Latta, supports the Romney-Ryan budget. In the Romney-Ryan budget, Pell Grants are cut drastically. The poorest students, financially, the poorest students will not have access to higher education. Over 1 million Pell Grants will be cut across the country, 356,000 right here in Ohio. In addition, the Stafford loan rates are doubled. What we do is give the 1% another benefit while hacking away at the middle class. We need to make sure that all of our students have access to the education that they desire and deserve. That's what it takes in a free society to maintain our democracy. So I am fully in support of federal government expenses to help educate our young people. And I'm proud to work at a state university and to work with students who struggle every day to work 40, 50 hours a week and take a full class load just so that they don't graduate more than they already will, $30,000 in debt. So my heart is with my students always. And I believe that the federal government has a responsibility to educate its citizens and to make education accessible and affordable. Thank you.
Mr. Eberly, if elected, how will you be able to help Owens Community College and your district as a whole?
When I'm elected, I will help Owens Community College because I'm an alumni of Owens Community College. I received my small business management degree here, as well as my real estate certificate. So I think that alone will help Owens in showing that people that there is a great access here at Owens Community College to improve your life. And I went to school here while I was working full-time in a restaurant. I was cooking and waiting tables, and it changed my life to be able to come here and achieve that associate's degree. So I think that would be proof positive that going to Owens is a great thing to do. I hope that I can help anyone who is in need of learning more about the libertarian philosophy, because in this country we're not going to change anything if we continue to vote Republican and Democrat, because they're just more of the same. The big government principles in place will never change unless we make real change and vote libertarian.
Thank you.
If elected, how will you be able to help Owens Community College and your district as a whole?
When I'm elected to Congress, I will work for you. I will not work for Wall Street. I will not work for K Street or any other street that does not exist in Northwest Ohio. I have listened to thousands of people across this region, and I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. We need jobs. We need educational opportunities. We need a better infrastructure in which to live, to learn, and to work. And I would like to address one other point. Yes, I am running as the Democratic candidate for Congress. The Democratic Party is a big tent party. We have people in the Democratic Party who fall all over the spectrum. I happen to be a moderate who moves towards the middle, and I believe that we have had enough of radicals on both sides of the aisle. My opponent, Bob Latta, was recently ranked the most conservative member of the U.S. House of Representatives. #1. This district, more conservative than Representative Aiken, more conservative than Representative Ryan, and this is not a radical district. We are moderate. We want to get things done. We want to educate our kids, have good jobs with good benefits, and that is what I, as a pastor, professor, engineer, mom, and wife, will bring back to Ohio's District 5. Thank you.
At this time, I would like to thank the candidates for coming out to Owens Community College tonight for the first ever District 5 debate. If they will entertain questions afterwards, I now open the floor to that.
I have a question for Eric. You got 000 in taxes. Where do you get funding of schools and everything else? Where does that come from?
Certainly. Go to fairtax.org and learn about the fair tax. It's a consumption-based tax, which is actually the most fair that can be.
Is it that tax?
It's consumption-based tax.
Okay.
Yes. And that's how we will at least cover the liabilities that we currently have, which are over $60 trillion at this point in our legacy costs, which has to come from somewhere. Everybody knows that. But I believe that the economic growth from the 000 plan will create tens of millions of jobs and insourcing in this country. So.
I just want to be clear on what our format at this point in time, because I just want to make sure that, I'm more than willing to talk with anyone one-on-one or in front of people, but I mean, it seems like it would be expedient to have a plan rather than just to let people ask questions, which could all go one way or the other, and
That'd be
that's,
really good.
you know, that's...
That's what I give it to you guys. You could have said no. Sorry.
There's a question that,
Angela, I don't know if you remember me, you came to my high school.
I do remember. I remember coming to Anthony Wayne, and it was a privilege to be there. Yep.
Yeah, so question 3 about the National Defense Authorization Act. You actually, when I asked you, you said, well, there's some things that you liked and there's some things you didn't like, but you didn't seem like you would strive to repeal it or strive to fight it. I believe that we should all have a right to a trial because isn't that what we're founded on? So what made you change your mind now that you're fully...
I agree with you completely, and I actually don't remember that conversation and that question. I'm sorry. I don't remember discussing that with you at that time.
Same thing with SOPA and CISPA, you said the same thing, so I was just wondering.
Well, I do believe with SOPA and CISPA that intellectual property rights are important, and I believe that we do need legislation that makes sure that intellectual property is not destroyed over the internet, is not taken over the internet unfairly. But I do believe SOPA and CISPA both go too far with infringement on privacy.
But you still want to infringe on small levels then? Just small levels? Or?
I'd like to thank the candidates again for coming out. Thank you.
And I'll be glad we can talk about that. Absolutely. Thank you.